Welcome to the Jonathan Van Bilsen Show, featuring lively, in-depth conversation with compelling guests from our community. And here is our host, Jonathan Van Bilsen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Today's guest was born in Montreal but spent most of his life in Durham. And for the past 7 years has served us where it matters. Stay tuned for the story behind the person. Welcome back. Our guest today is the Honourable Erin O'Toole, Member of Parliament for Durham Region. Erin, welcome.
It's great to be with you, Jonathan.
So I understand that you were born in Montreal, you moved to Bowmanville at a very early age, and that was because of your father, I believe?
Yeah, like thousands of kids in the Durham region, 46 years ago, my dad worked for General Motors, and he had worked at St. Therese in Quebec, and I was born there. My mom was wrapping up her university. And then he was transferred to Oshawa, which he wanted because he's from Peterborough originally. And I grew up in Bowmanville and Port Perry, and really proud of the Durham region, and it's in my blood.
I know you make a lot of trips to the north part of the region, to Port Perry and so forth, which is fantastic. Also, I want to congratulate you on your recent victory.
Thank you very much.
And I understand that this week is the 7th anniversary of your stint in Ottawa.
Yeah, I was elected in a by-election in November of 2012, so it was a bit of an unusual entry to politics. I was filling a gap. You know, our previous MP, Bev Oda, retired, and I stepped into the fold. And then I had an amazing 3 years at the end of the Harper government, served in cabinet, served as a parliamentary secretary. Then I ran to replace Harper, and so I've been re-elected twice, in 2015 and 2019. I'm very proud to represent the region I grew up in.
Well, and I'm sure it's very much appreciated, everything that you do for the region. We'll touch a little bit later on your initiatives when you were Minister of Veteran Affairs and some of the things that you've done. I wanted to kind of go back. You were in the military, and how did you get into the military? How does that happen? Do you just wake up one day and say, hey, I want to be a general?
No. You know, I grew up in a family where my dad was always very involved. You know, he helped raise the funds to build the hockey rink, to build the first indoor swimming pool in Bowmanville. He was a coach. We were involved in our church, in the community. And so I was always raised to be an active participant in your community, your country. But the real change was in between grade 12 and 13, which they had back in my day.
Right.
I lived in Kingston for the summer and worked for TransCanada Pipelines, and I did pipeline inspection. Yes, there are resource jobs in Ontario, not just out west. And I lived in Kingston on my own, and I went over to Royal Military College, saw the campus, and I saw that you could push yourself physically, intellectually, you could learn leadership skills. So when I came back for grade 13, I said to my parents, I want to join the military. And my dad thought I was crazy. But going to military college, serving in the military, living and serving across the country, I think made me an even more patriotic Canadian, and it was the best decision I ever made.
You had a stint out west with the military?
Yeah, my first posting was to Trenton, and I worked on search and rescue at the Rescue Coordination Center, and I was actually there when my dad was running for office in 1995 as part of the Mike Harris Common Sense Revolution, so I took my leave that year, and that's where my political love really developed. I followed politics closely, but my dad wasn't a politician when I grew up. Right. He worked at GM. But then after Trenton, I went to Winnipeg and served and got my wings as an air navigator. And then after Manitoba, I chose a posting on the east coast of Canada on Sea King helicopters. And in that role, I also sailed with our Atlantic Navy. And it was very important because I met my wife, Rebecca, in Nova Scotia. And then meeting her led me to go to law school at Dalhousie.
Right.
But I had an amazing opportunity sailing on HMCS St. John's through some of the fjords of Norway, down to Puerto Rico, training with the United States, getting to see the country and see how well regarded Canada is in the world. My military experience has really been formative to not just my life, but certainly my political career.
And how long were you in?
I was in for 12 years, and that includes my time at RMC. It also includes the last couple of years I transferred to the reserves while I was at law school, and I helped train. I ran the mission simulator for the Sea King community, and they were great. They planned these operational simulator missions in or around my law school schedule.
Nice.
And it helped us. You know, Rebecca and I were a new couple. She just graduated from King's College, and We had a home, so we didn't have two nickels to rub together. And so at law school, it was great that the military also helped me earn a few bucks while I went to school.
Wonderful. So the law career is interesting. How does one bridge from being a lawyer into politics?
This is, well, the hardest transition in my life was actually military to law.
Okay.
Because when you join the military, and I work on this with veterans all the time, that transition, I'd never written a resume. I joined the military, first went in a recruiting office at 17, went to basic training at 18. I'd never written a resume, and then I'm applying to work on Bay Street in my 30s. So a lot of military people, the longer you stay in, the more you haven't had that experience of applying for jobs in the private sector. So I did well in law school, and that led me back to Ontario to practice law on Bay Street.
What type of law were you practicing?
I was a corporate lawyer. I did a mixture of some corporate law, some energy regulation, and I was a litigator as well.
Okay.
So court cases. And for 5 years, I was Procter & Gamble's lawyer in Canada.
Okay.
So it was, I like to joke that for about a year, I was the global lawyer for CoverGirl Cosmetics. Now, I know the audience here, when they see me, they think of CoverGirl right away. But it was a great company to work for. We signed an up-and-coming artist at the time named Taylor Swift to a CoverGirl, Queen Latifah, a lot of brands. It was a great company to work for. They were based out of Hunt Valley, Maryland, just outside of Baltimore, and I was offered a move to the United States.
Really?
And my wife said the move from Nova Scotia to Ontario was as far as she was going. So no move to Ohio or Maryland, but it was a great opportunity for me as a corporate lawyer. And Procter & Gamble was a manufacturer in Ontario. So they had manufacturing plants in Belleville and Brockville.
Right.
So what's great about my military and my private sector experience is I bring that to Parliament. And I'm one of the few people that have actually worked for a company manufacturing products in Ontario. And I can explain why the uncompetitive moves of the Trudeau government have a real impact on jobs.
Right. So
I try and bring all that experience to my role as an MP, not just for Durham, but for Canada's conversation on a whole range of issues.
Which is excellent because I think business is a very good basis for politics.
It's helped. You know what's interesting, and I use this joke a lot. You know, here's my career in a graph: military officer, very highly regarded; lawyer, less so; politician, less so. I'm not on the right climb, Jonathan, as your audience would agree.
I won't ask what the future holds then.
And in a lot of my pictures, and when I ran for office, I highlight my military service because Liberal, Conservative, NDP, they respect that.
Right.
Saying I was a Bay Street lawyer doesn't bring you a lot of respect.
Right.
But I'll tell you, my legal training and my work in the private sector, my work with P&G, my charitable work has formulated a lot of my positions in politics as well. So I think the more experience you bring to Parliament, the better. And our House of Commons should be that. It should be our cross-section of the Canadian population, our commoners, our commons.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't have to be born the son of the Prime Minister to lead. But we have one of those right now, I think.
I wasn't aware, but...
You should be bringing a range of experiences to office, and I try and do that.
So you mentioned your wife, Erin. She's from the East Coast, is she?
My wife, Rebecca, is from Fall River, Nova Scotia. I met her when I was in the Air Force. I met her at a Halifax Mooseheads game where the Navy was being featured, and one of my best friends, Darren, was with the Navy presentation there, and we met, and... yeah, it was love at first sight, as they say, and
nice. I am curious because you must have a very, very busy schedule between Toronto and Ottawa. How do you work the home-life balance? How does that work?
I say for most families, I'm sure any family in Durham with both parents working or with stressful jobs find that work-life balance is something you're always chasing and you never actually achieve. It's like the dog racing after that rabbit you'll never catch. This has been the biggest stress for us. Is I've got young children. Molly's 13, Jack is 8, but Jack was 1 when I was elected. Right. If you look at the swearing-in pictures, I was just sworn in last week. Jack was in our arms when I was first elected. So we've tried our best to balance off. We have a place in Bowmanville, we have a place in Ottawa, and the family tries to be a part of both milieus. Right. But for 4 years, I drove back and forth, and I missed everything in the kids' lives.
Right.
So we've tried to make sure that we're not making the kids and their parents in their role suffer.
Right, of course.
They didn't run for office, I did. So
Yeah.
how can we balance it off? It's something we're always trying to work on.
And are they going to school in Ottawa, or?
They when I ran for leader, they transferred midway through the school year because I was traveling the country, and but I still had my parliamentary duty. So
Right.
Parliament sits about 2/3 of the year. It's a bit like the school calendar. There's a break at Christmas. There's a break in the summer. Break at elections, obviously.
Right.
So we go back and forth, and so it's a bit crazy, but it works. Some people, I always say when we get frustrated, I think, what about a military family?
Right.
Mom or dad might not be home for 6 to 8 months.
Right.
So if I'm away for a week or two, there's always families that have bigger challenges.
Right. Although I'm sure it's difficult for an 8-year-old to understand that.
My daughter Molly, who remembers my job as a lawyer
Right.
vaguely, knows, but Jack, this is all he knows,
Right,
and I think he gets the most frustrated with it. But I take them sometimes to events, and that helps them understand what Dad does.
What does Dad do in his time off? When you're not,
I love watching movies with the kids.
Okay.
The kids inherited my love of movies, whether it's Netflix or whether we go to a lot of movies. We just rewatched Toy Story 4. That's a winner for me. I do try and read for pleasure and things like that as well, but whatever family time I can get, just simple things are sometimes the best.
Thank you for sharing that. After the break, we will continue and we'll talk a little bit about your political career. Welcome back. Our guest today is Erin O'Toole, Member of Parliament for Durham Region. So, Erin, during the election, I noticed that at one of the debates, there was this massive RV parked in the parking lot with your name all over it. And I wondered if that's where you slept, if that's where you lived.
At times it seemed like I lived there. That was our mobile campaign office, Jonathan. One of our online followers named it the Winnebago. And because we won the election, obviously it was an appropriate name. But it was my way to try and connect with as many people in Durham as possible. You know how sometimes the North, Scugog, feels a bit cut off from activities in the South. We usually, in previous campaigns, had a Bowmanville campaign office and a Port Perry campaign office. But this time, we visited with the Winnebago every hamlet in the riding of Durham. And we had some amazing experiences there. I remember in Seagrave, we had a Korean War veteran and a Suez veteran at the kitchen table in the Winnebago talking about their military experiences. Unbelievable. So I made a pledge to visit every part of the riding, listen to everyone, and the RV, the mobile office, helped us do that. We got so many good comments, and of course, I was driving it around. I was driving around a big RV with my mug on the side of it, and so people saw that I was trying to get out there and listen.
Well, it certainly seemed to work because everybody was talking about it. I spoke with your dad. For those of you who don't know, Erin's father, John O'Toole, was the provincial member of parliament for this area. And I asked him what it was like to drive that RV, and he said that he wasn't allowed to drive it.
Well, we did. I drove it probably 95% of the time. We had a few other volunteers for days where I had to make some phone calls or we had a really busy day, and sometimes parking it was a bit of a challenge. So if we had a busy day, I could hop out, and the fathers of some of my campaign team who drive RVs and are used to driving those vehicles would drive it. But it was a lot of fun, and it showed that I want to make sure every part of Durham is respected and part of our dialogue. And yeah, so I think we will do it again. I've had MPs from other parts of the country saying, how did you do the whole mobile office thing?
Right.
So I think politicians need to get out of their little bubbles and hear what's really going on out there, and I'm committed to that.
Excellent. It's a great way to do it. It really is fantastic. I understand, too, there's a rumor that you did spend a night or two in there with your son, Jack.
Well, Jack, who is 8, thought it was the most amazing thing ever, and he wanted to sleep in it. So one night we slept in it in the parking lot of a grocery store. And of course, he didn't want to sleep on the nice bed or the bunks or ever. There was a little bubble over the driver's seat that is really for kids. It's a bunkie.
Right.
We slept in there, and it was not that comfortable, but it was a bit of the adventure. And as I said, I try and include the kids in the political process where appropriate. And now, as a family, we've said we're going to try and do an RV vacation, maybe as we go out east some year, do the Cabot Trail. It was a lot of fun.
Are you going to use the one with your mug on the side?
No, that was
Okay.
removed. I had a great moment in that the glamour of politics, there is no glamour really. When I was returning the RV, we had to empty the waste. So I did a Twitter post that I was having my cousin Eddie from Christmas Vacation moment as the newly elected MP is emptying the toilets before returning it. And a good friend of mine, 10 West in Oshawa, wrapped it, and we had the wrap properly taken off. And my goal was to return it with no scratches, no bumps, and the wrap removed, and we did that.
Excellent. I'm curious, in traveling around and meeting all the people, or many of the people of your constituency, what sort of requests do people give you? What are their needs? Like, what do people want from you as their representative in Ottawa?
The biggest thing, they want to know that they're being heard. And I think, as I said, in all parts of the riding, not just down in the more populated parts of the South. And the issues change. So I went to Burkton. I went to a breakfast with farmers and was listening to what the agricultural community has to say. They're often neglected, to be honest. And 50% of our economy in Durham has always been agriculture.
Right.
It also gives us the quality of life we have here. And our trade disruptions with China, India, and other places, they seem remote, but they're impacting the price farmers in Durham can get for their products. Of course, a lot of people worried about the post-GM. You know, GM is going to close its assembly operations at the end of the year.
Right.
I think a lot of it is because of the uncompetitiveness of the Trudeau government, but they want to see what the future is. I'm a big proponent of nuclear energy. In fact, it's not just a big employer, it's key to us meeting our carbon lower future.
Right.
So I try and listen to hear what's on people's minds and then advocate based on what I hear.
How do you think Canada sits on the world stage right now?
Well, right now we are seen as a bit of a laggard. We have not lived up to our commitments to NATO, despite all the talk of Mr. Trudeau seeking a UN Security Council seat. Even our mission to Mali wasn't very clear. We've lost trade relationships. We have difficulty with the US, clearly, but India, Italy, other countries have imposed tariffs on Canada. China, our dispute there. Trudeau is not taken seriously on the world stage because he's seen as putting his own image and his own brand ahead of the national interest. We saw that in his trip to India, where it was all about photographs and all about helping his political friends,
Right.
rather than fighting for Canada's interests with the world's largest democracy. So I've been the critic for foreign affairs, and I've had a lot to critique with Trudeau.
The fact that it's a minority government, what does that mean for you and the way that you function in the political arena? Is it different from the way it was?
It means we might be able to extract more concessions, more policy moves based on the fact that Trudeau can't govern in the way he wants. For instance, I had a bill on pension security for pensioners from General Motors, things like that. I wanted to at least get it past second reading so that we could invite pensioners, invite groups to talk about the risks for these retirees. They shot it down. They shot down bills on organ donor national lists, things like that they shouldn't have done. They only did them because they were conservative bills. Right. So I hope they listen more. I'm very worried about national unity and our resource economy, which Mr. Trudeau's brought in a bunch of policies that have hurt. Right. So hopefully we can be a louder voice, because they do risk losing a vote, and that means they have to listen more than they have.
In the last few minutes, I wanted to chat about the Sam Sharpe initiative that you undertook, dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome. First of all, maybe just a couple of seconds on who Sam Sharpe was, in case people don't know.
Sure. Sam Sharpe was the Member of Parliament for the north part of the Durham region over a century ago. So he was from Uxbridge, represented what was then called Ontario North, Ontario County being now the Durham region. He was a lawyer. He raised a regiment that is now the Ontario Regiment. He fought at Vimy Ridge. He was the only MP re-elected in the 1917 election. He won a Distinguished Service Order. The trouble is, no one knew who he was. because he died by suicide
Right.
with the trauma of war. The young men from the Durham area that he recruited lost at Vimy, lost at Avion, lost at Passchendaele.
Right.
So he was written out of history because we couldn't talk about suicide a century ago. It's still a difficult situation.
Right.
But I started a breakfast years ago with Romeo Dallaire to allow veterans to tell their story about getting help.
Right.
We can't let the only stories in the media be about suicide as an option. We have to give hope for those with mental health injuries or mental health generally.
Right.
And conversations reduce stigma. Conversations allow people to get help. And we wanted stories to be told of veterans who were in a dark place,
Right.
like Mr. Dallaire was himself, who got help they needed and now are on their own path, their own wellness path. And some of these injuries will be with you for life, but there are ways that we can help you, and we need to make sure people get the help.
I remember, I think Mr. Dallaire told me once, he said he goes to a psychiatrist and a psychologist. The psychiatrist gives him drugs so he can sleep better. The psychologist doesn't want him to take the drugs so that he can explain his dreams and that to him. And the end result is he gets about 2 or 3 hours of sleep every night, and has been doing that since his stint in Rwanda. So do you have an actual program that you administer, that people are involved in?
Well, the interesting and the thing with mental health injuries and the challenge is physical injuries are easier to deal with. If you have a tragic injury, like you lose a limb or something, we now for hundreds of years have known how to treat that.
Right.
It's really only been in the last 30 years that we're providing options. And there's no one size fits all with a mental health injury. We need to make sure that we have options, the peer-to-peer counseling, a traditional psychiatrist relationship. Sometimes service animals, equine therapy can open the door to a psychologist helping you. A number of programs. Sometimes it'll take a veteran 2 or 3 options till they find something that works. But we want those conversations to be held. The longer that they put off dealing with their mental health injury, the worse it gets. They can have addiction issues. They can lose their marriage. So we need to have these conversations, even difficult ones. And Romeo and I have been able to do that. We've also made sure that Sam Sharpe, 100 years after his death, was properly recognized in Parliament because he was forgotten despite his heroic service.
Well, there's a fantastic sculpture, a bronze sculpture, that was created by our own Tyler Briley from this area, which I understand is going to be hanging in somewhere in Parliament. There's a 10-year reconstruction project going on, but when that's complete, I understand this sculpture will be hanging back in the...
Absolutely. It was hung before Parliament closed, right, so that we could show 100 years to the day our country is maturing. We can have these conversations about mental health now. It's now on loan to the Royal Ottawa Hospital, where the Operational Stress Injury Clinic is for our veterans. And when Parliament opens back up, Sam will be there. Sam epitomizes the fact that we're now able to talk about this. And I'm very proud, the provincial government, with help from Minister Downey and Lindsay Park, we've just renamed the Oshawa Courthouse the Sam Sharpe Courthouse.
Oh, wonderful.
Because he was a lawyer from Durham. So we're showing people that we can talk about things. Talk leads to help, and I'm very proud to be a part of it.
Excellent. Very appreciative of what you do for that, because it's an awareness situation. That's probably the most important part of it, making people aware of it. Erin, thank you so much for sharing your history, your story, your life with us today. It's been very, very interesting. Appreciate you being here. And I'd like to thank everyone else for spending the last 30 minutes